So it's just more interesting to me, the complicated, sophisticated, creative ways in which people do good things.
That was Toni Morrison. Actor and writer Amber Tamblyn reads comments by journalist Rebecca Solnit.
You are not giving up, and neither am I. The fact that we cannot save everything does not mean we cannot save anything. And everything we can save is worth saving. You may need to grieve or scream or take time off, but you have a role no matter what. And right now, good friends and good principles are worth gathering in. Remember what you love.
Rebecca Solnit.
In the same way that Standing Rock didn't stop a pipeline, but had a number of remarkable other consequences, including inspiring AOC, who was just a bartender and waitress nobody had ever heard of, to run for office, and one of the great upset victories of recent history, defeat the third most powerful man in the Democratic House to become the youngest woman in Congress ever, and do a hell of a lot of amazing stuff, and be maybe one of the great voices of our time.
Yeah, I think so.
So Standing Rock inspired her to do that.
Yeah. So a lot has changed since you entered the climate movement or the environmental movement. How do you evaluate the progress that's been made when we look back? And we've talked about some of these, the recent bills, but when you look back on maybe the last 20, 15, or even 5 years, what we've done, and also considering that as there's been progress, there's been continued acceleration of climate impacts. Last year was the hottest. This is the hottest year on record, and that keeps happening. And
thank you for asking me a slowness question, long-term change. I think if you told people where we were with renewables and how powerful and engaged the climate movement is, and how much the public is engaged compared to where we were 10 years ago, I don't know how much people would believe it. And I think some of the problems we still have are that a lot of people get this vague understanding and don't get updates. The idea that we don't have the solutions, that nobody cares, that the media is not covering it, are all things that were reasonably true to say 15 or 20 years ago. They're completely inaccurate now. And it's also really interesting because there was this period, I think of it as the Al Gore Inconvenient Truth Compact fluorescent Prius era, when renewables, I didn't fully realize myself until I read this wonderful book that's a short history of the human use of coal from the very beginning through the Industrial Revolution to the present. The book came out at the end of the 90s, and it said, burning fossil fuel is bad, but we don't really have an alternative. And I read this about 8 or 10 years ago, and it made me think, oh my God, renewables were not what they are now. We've had an energy revolution, and this energy revolution is too slow for most people to have noticed. Renewables were expensive, they were primitive, they were utterly inadequate to the job, even a little over 10 years ago, let alone at the millennium. So we've had an energy revolution that's incredibly exciting, but only if you can see the arc of change, which is slow and incremental and very wonky. There's a kind of depression where you just want to sit in the corner or curl up in fetal position or whatever. But these sort of evangelists of giving up, like the energized ones, I don't fully understand it. But I find that a lot of times very often that their facts are wrong, and that their frameworks about how change works and the nature of power is often wrong too. And then within that, I think there's a lot of people who care, who would like to hope, but who haven't been offered hope. And then what's really interesting, when you get to the organizers, the scientists, the journalists, the people who are really involved, they're scared, but they're not despondent. They know that this is the decisive decade, the future is what we will make it in the present. There are parameters, of course. We can't make it like we never burned those trillions of tons of fossil fuel and put all that carbon dioxide in the upper atmosphere. But we have tremendous choices in this moment, and the difference between the best case scenario and the worst case scenario is profound. And so I actually talked to somebody who works very closely with a lot of climate leaders who said, and she told me that none of them are despondent she's working with, these are people doing organizing work all over the country. I also see in Frontlines communities, and we have a bunch of Frontline community members from Fiji, from the Marshall Islands, the Bangladeshi American, but who's very involved with her home country, the Philippines, which is one of the most climate impacted places. And they're not defeatist because there's also this weird thing. I wrote an essay last year called Despair is a Luxury, because like for most of us in this room, I can't see you all because it's very bright up here, and I don't know all your life stories, and I'm sure I'm wrong about some of you, but for most of us, giving up, at some level we secretly know that we can give up and our lives will still be relatively comfortable and safe.
And it's easier to give up.
Yeah, so what you're really doing is you're giving up on behalf of people. You're saying, let those kids starve, let that ice melt, let those storms destroy the crops of those people in Central America. We who are relatively comfortable, safe, affluent, and therefore powerful, I think have no moral right to give up. And we're giving up, to let other people die first, other people lose first, other species lose first. And I don't think surrendering prematurely is a very interesting way to live your life. And
no, but
I also think the facts don't bear out that we should do that. And I don't think it's ethical. And I think the facts say there's a lot worth fighting for now, and fighting for it is a really good way to live.
Toni Morrison, commenting on why times like these are precisely when artists go to work. Psychologist Melanie Joy talks about how distressing media and events can be for highly sensitive people, and how our intense emotions can turn us away from things we desire to change in the world. See the Creative Mind post for this podcast episode with links to resources and other material.